Sodales. So let's talk about virtual assessment. And today we're actually going to talk about something that seems a little bit more related to our topic of virtual assessment. Because today we're going to talk about this. As soon as I saw this picture on Creative Commons Search, I knew what we needed to talk about today. Because we've all had that stack, right? We may have a virtual stack today. We may have hundreds of emails or thousands of things in a Google Classroom folder, or seemingly tens of thousands of notifications in whatever your LMS is. But around this time of the year, it often is starting to feel like this. So is it starting to feel like this? But then when you step back from it for a minute, does it always start to feel like this around this time of year? Is there always too much stuff to look at? Too many things that students have done and you feel like you have to do something with them? I know I've been there. I know we've all been there, right? But the thing about it is there are three different things that teachers do. And we sometimes use the same name for all three of them. And the three of them, technically speaking, are assessing, grading, and correcting. Those are three different things. Typically, teachers use the word grading to stand for all three. And then we talk about we've got too much grading to do or too many things to grade or all these grades to enter. And that part's important. That's a big part of what we do. But it isn't the only thing we do. And there's a difference between grading, assessing, and correcting. So, assessing. That's the most important thing that we actually do as teachers in terms of when we look at student work. The most important thing that we probably do is help our students learn the content so that they can be assessed, develop the skills that they need, however we express that in our particular world. But assessment, say our friends at Wikipedia, is the systematic process, so it's a process of documenting and using empirical data on the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and beliefs of students to refine programs and to improve student learning. So it's a process where you are documenting knowledge and skills and attitudes and beliefs. And it has the purpose of getting better at what we do and having students get better at what they do. And that seems like a pretty good definition of assessment. You could argue about the wording, but there's a big difference between that and the other things that we lump together with it, and we use that word grading for all three. So this is a process of documenting students' knowledge and skills and understandings, and then using that information for a purpose. And I don't know that we necessarily feel like we have time to do that because of all the other things we got to do, right? Because the thing about it is, we all have our own definitions of the other two, right? Of grading and correcting. So I think, for me, grading is, so you've looked at this, you've done this assessing process, hopefully, and then you transform that into a number or a set of numbers, and you record those numbers and do something with them. And then correcting is where you look at all the mistakes that students made and you fix them. But why do we do that? Why do we feel like we have to correct all the errors? I mean, empirically, we know from our own experience that it doesn't make much difference. There's a whole pile of research about how correcting students' errors does not help. And yet, faced with that stack of papers, we feel like we gotta not just assess, which is important, not just grade, which is like part of our contractual job, right, in most schools, but also we feel like we gotta correct. And that's what kind of builds up, right? That's what kind of makes things hard and difficult and complicated and overwhelming looking at that stack of papers. And it's not just that I need to look at them and see what my students know. Oh no, says my inner voice. I gotta fix every mistake because I have to. So think for a minute about assessment, actually looking at the student's performance, grading, transforming that into a number, correcting, fixing the mistakes for whatever reason that's deeply buried in our psyche or just because we think we're supposed to. Which one or ones took the most time and effort in the before times and old normal times? I bet if you're a corrector, I bet it was the correction part. The other part, that takes a little while, but it doesn't take as long as it does to fix all those mistakes. Has that changed in crisis remote times? Do you still find yourself doing all this correcting as well as this grading and assessing part? And now here comes the scary question. How does that relate to your good teacher story? We've been talking about that in the past few videos. Your story about what good teachers do and what they don't do and what they're like, what they're not like, the qualities that they have. Is there something in your good teacher story that's telling you you have to fix every mistake or else you're not a good teacher? And when you stop and think about it, is it not just your good teacher story, is it your good little teacher story? I actually had an administrator, bless his heart, who referred to a colleague, thankfully after she'd left, as a good little teacher, and she was good looking too. And there was not quite an audible gasp from the room, but really? Really? But that's what he said. So you may be looking at this picture and thinking, oh, actually, my stack is taller than those pyramids. But I picked the pyramids because, well, partly because they were actually provided as a placeholder in this theme, but also because the more I looked at them, I looked at the sun rising over the pyramid. I looked at the beginning of a new day. And I said, you know what? There's some good news here. Here's that good news. If you don't like that story, if you felt an audible gasp rising up in yourself at the thought of being that good little teacher, so unselfish. If you're thinking to yourself, what does that mean? I'm supposed to die and then they'll put up a plaque? I told you guys the story of my two colleagues who did die, and they did put up a plaque. But if you don't like that story, you don't want that story for yourself, the good news is you can change it. And you can leave all the old stuff in the past. Even if it feels like it's old and as huge as the Sphinx or the Great Pyramid, you can leave that stuff in the past and you can make yourself a better story. And then it doesn't have to be that difficult. It doesn't have to be that complicated, and it definitely doesn't have to be that hard. And you don't have to do it alone. So, if you know you need help, you guys know how to reach me. If you're just too overwhelmed, you need me to reach you, tell me that, because I will. And the main thing is, remember that old story about assessing and grading and correcting doesn't have to be true anymore. And until the next time we see each other, Walete Sodales.